Hi, fourth grade. I miss you guys so much, and I really wish that we were in person about to do this reading lesson, but unfortunately, there's a screen between us. But that's going to be okay because we're still going to learn. I hope that you've had a good first 2 weeks of remote learning and e learning. I've been tracking your progress on IXL, and some of you guys are doing an absolutely amazing job, so I'm so proud of you. Today, we're going to do a reading lesson. And I am nice and comfy, so I hope you are comfy. I've got my vanilla candle going. So just make sure that you're comfy. It's not like regular class time. We have to be in those crickety rockety chairs that I know you guys love so much. So today in reading, we're going to go over our objectives. You will need a few things with you. So before we start our lesson, I'm going to show you the materials that you need so you can have them kind of close to you. Okay, so first, you'll need a pencil. You will need a pen. Red is fine, or blue. You will need a Sharpie, Sharpie, it's a highlighter with the brand Sharpie. A highlighter, but if you don't have a highlighter at home, you can still use your red pen to underline things. And then I did send your parents an email with some handouts. So you know how usually in class I'll hand things out. So hopefully your parents printed this sheet. It says Annabelle Lee at the top. And secondly, you will need these poetry terms. Okay? So, as you can probably tell, we're going to be studying poetry, and the reason we're doing poetry is because April is National Poetry Month, and so readers everywhere immerse themselves in poetry. And so the goal is, when we come back to school, that you all will create your own poetry books. But we're first going to start with reading some famous poems, analyzing them, and learning some poetic terms to help us analyze the poems. So we're going to start the class like we always do with our objectives. And I'd like you to read them. It might be a little awkward at home to read them as I show you them, but go ahead and do that. Objective number 1. I can describe the difference between poetry and prose. And objective 2, I can define poetic terms. So the new vocabulary words we're learning today are tone, stanza, rhyme, and refrain. So we might be familiar with this one because we've written a poem before, and rhyme, but we're going to learn that there's different ways that you can rhyme as well. Okay, so those are our 2 objectives today. We're going to know that there's 2 different types of writing. There's prose writing, not pro like basketball pro, see how it's spelled differently, and then poetry. So the first thing that you'll need, guys, is this handout because I'm going to read to you my favorite poem first. It's called Annabelle Lee. And if you notice, it's hard to point, I intentionally whited out the author. You can see it says by blank. That's not a mistake, that's on purpose because there's going to be a little trivia question. So I'm going to read the poem to you, and I'm going to give you 3 options of 3 famous poets. And I'd like you to guess which poet wrote this poem. So before we start, here are the options. You may or may not have heard these names before. Choice A is Robert Frost. Choice B is Edgar Allan Poe. And choice C is Walt Whitman. And he has alliteration in his name, doesn't he? WW. And hi, Annabelle, if you're watching, this poem is named not after you, but of course that's pretty cool to have your name in the poem. So we will read the poem, and then we'll see if any poetic terms fit the poem. So read along as I read it aloud to you. It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee, with a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago, in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we. And neither the angels in heaven above, nor the demons down under the sea, can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee, and the stars never rise but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by my side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Wow, that's a long poem. The reason I love this poem so much is because of the tone, and we'll learn what that word means soon. But the tone of this poem, I don't know if you felt it, but it's kind of like a dark, mysterious, yet kind of romantic poem. And so it kind of sounds like a song when you sing it. There's certain rhyme and rhythm to the poem. So I want to talk about, back to our objective, after listening to a poem, if we can describe the difference between poetry and prose. So a prose writing is something that you would read in any novel or nonfiction book. Prose looks like this. Regular writing, paragraph form, proper punctuation, capital letters, okay? And poetry, looks like this. So number one, the form is different. Poetry is cool because you don't have to use correct punctuation all the time. In fact, there was a cool poet named E.E. Cummings, and he decided that he was not going to follow the rules of capitalization because he was kind of a rebel. And so he decapitalized the letter E.E. and Cummings. And so his whole last name was supposed to be lowercase, and it kind of drives some grammar teachers crazy, but that's how he liked it. So the format is different, but also the way that poetry and prose sounds is different. So I'm going to read a summary of Annabel Lee, and I want you to hear the difference in how these two sound. So this is poetry about Annabel Lee, and this is prose. Annabel Lee is about a beautiful, painful memory. The speaker of the poem is remembering his long-lost love, Annabel Lee. The speaker knew Annabel Lee many years ago when she was a girl, and they both lived in a kingdom by the sea. Even though they were only children, these two were really seriously in love. So in love that the angels in heaven noticed that they were jealous. Maybe that was a bad thing because our speaker blames the angels for killing his girlfriend. Apparently, a wind came from the clouds, which made Annabel Lee sick, and then eventually killed her. When this happened, her relatives came and took her away from the speaker and shut her up in a tomb. So number one, you kind of hear the difference between prose, which is your normal everyday writing with punctuation, and poetry, which is more expressive, has more figurative language, has a different form, and of course the biggest difference you hear is one rhymes and one does not. So that's the difference between poetry and prose. Now, let's go back to our choices of who you thought wrote that poem. If you think it was Robert Frost, that is incorrect. If you thought it was Walt Whitman, that is also incorrect. So, drum roll please. Edgar Allan Poe is the writer of this poem, and we'll read more from Poe. And he's usually a pretty dramatic guy. He lived kind of a tough life, and his wife died before he did. And so sometimes people say the poem Annabel Lee is about his wife, possibly. We can't know for sure, but that's what people think. So good job if you said Edgar Allan Poe. He also wrote that The Raven, which you're probably familiar with. My class from last year loved that one. Okay, so now that we've heard a poem, we have heard prose. We know the difference between the two. One's more expressive, one is just straightforward writing. Now we're going to look at the poetry terms. So here's where you'll need note cards. I forgot to tell you that in the beginning, I think. Note cards and a pencil. And your poetry terms. So in order to understand Annabel Lee, we have to know some vocabulary words to help us dissect the poem and what it really means. So we're going to do, remember, tone, stanza, rhyme, and refrain. So I'll give you a few seconds to make sure you have these. So poetry terms. And we're going to start with tone. As I pull up each vocabulary word, you're going to pause my video and you're going to take your note card and you're going to write the vocab word on the white side, of course, and as always, the definition on the line side. So as soon as I explain what tone is, you're going to pause my video, get out your note card, and write with your pencil what it is. Then we can figure out what the tone of Annabel Lee is. Sound good? Okay. This handout says the tone describes the poet's attitude towards the poem's speaker and subject matter as interpreted by the reader. If you've ever heard in reading of the word mood, right, it's very similar, tone and mood. And we can use kind of key words, positive or negative, to figure out what the tone is. And so if it's the poet's attitude towards the poem's speaker, I'm thinking that Annabel Lee has a tone that's kind of melancholy and maybe a little bit somber. So right now you're going to take your note card and you're going to write tone and the definition. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and you can kind of see maybe me writing it as well. So tone. And then on the back, you write the definition that's here. So you will write tone describes the poet's attitude toward the poem's speaker and subject matter. And it says as interpreted by the reader. So we could kind of have a few different ideas. I might say the poem is mostly dark, but you might say the poem is mostly romantic and kind of nostalgic, which means that the poet, Edgar Allan Poe, likes to reflect on his memories and kind of hold tight to them. Because it says it was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea, but it kind of seems like Poe really still loves Annabel Lee as if she was still alive, even though she's in a sepulcher, which means a tomb, if you didn't catch that one. Okay, so our first vocab word is done, tone. And then yours should kind of look like this. Now, you're going to take your poem, Annabelle Lee, and let's see if we can find some tone words. So the first tone words I see in the first stanza, which is kind of like the first paragraph, is "Then to love and be loved by me." So I underlined that, and I'm going to make a note with my red pen. And so that's kind of like a romantic tone. So I just put romantic there. Or if you guys wanted to highlight, of course, you could do that too. So we have that keyword love that shows that, okay, this is a romantic kind of tone. But then if you skip down to, let's see, stanza 1, 2, 3, go down to stanza 3, where it says, "And this was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabelle Lee." So if I'm thinking of winds and clouds, it's kind of dark and it's chilling Annabelle Lee. And then he goes on to say it shut her up in a sepulcher, which is the same thing as a tomb. That's scary. Then I'm kind of getting a dark tone. So I'm going to go ahead and write dark. And you just do what I'm doing, like in class. Dark, but also kind of mysterious too, because I'm wondering, and you might be wondering, right, how did a cloud come and chill and eventually kill Annabelle Lee? And if you kind of look at what some people think about this, they think it's that Annabelle Lee gets frostbite and that she just got really cold. So I'm going to also write mysterious. So romantic, dark, mysterious. And so we're learning that there can be more than one tone, right? The author can switch tones to kind of make you feel some certain emotions. And then the last thing, let's see. Since he is remembering this as a memory and he likes to hold on to the good times that he had with Annabelle Lee, I'm thinking of going down to this last stanza and writing the word nostalgic. I don't know if you've heard of this word before. But nostalgic is a good word. It's kind of like a word that describes when you're remembering things that happened to you years ago and you get kind of like a warm feeling, like maybe a great Christmas that you had, or a friend of yours that moved away and you just kind of smile thinking about the memories that you had with them. That's kind of nostalgic, and you hold tight to those memories too. Okay, so we know that tone is the poet's attitude, or kind of like the feeling, the mood of the poem, and we were able to find that Annabelle Lee has a tone that's romantic, dark, mysterious, and nostalgic. So that is 4 different tone words that we had. Okay. And I think we're going to stop there today because my video is going quite long, 18 minutes. And so we'll just focus on tone for today. And then for the next couple, we'll go over rhyme and refrain and stanza. Okay, so I want to end sharing a different poem with you that's a little happier. I know that Annabelle Lee is kind of dark, but I love it so much because I think it's beautiful, and I love Edgar Allan Poe. Where is he? There he is. I don't want to have him in here too long because he might start to creep me out a little bit. I definitely don't want to hang him up on my walls. So I'm going to share, let's end the lesson, and I'm going to have an exit slip for you. So if you can get your exit slip and write with your red pen. Go ahead and write exit slip on the front. And on the back, I want you to go ahead and write this first question. You are going to write, what is the tone of this poem. That's what you're going to write. What is the tone of this poem? The poem that I'm about to read to you, not Annabelle Lee, because we already figured that out together. So make sure you write that on your note card. What is the tone of this poem? And on our Zoom meeting, you can come with your exit slip and we can discuss what the tone of the poem was of Annabelle Lee. And we can also discuss the tone of the poem I'm about to read to you. Okay. Have you ever heard of this guy? He has a collection of poems, has written hundreds of them. You're probably most familiar with him because he loves to write poems for kids. And his name is Shel Silverstein. And he has written books like Where the Sidewalk Ends. And then I think another one is A Light in the Attic. So he has a way different tone than Edgar Allan Poe. Like, you can just tell he looks a lot happier than Poe, who was just kind of creepily staring at us. So he has a very humorous and funny tone, but also he has some kind of like inspirational poems too. So I'm going to show you Listen to the Mustn'ts by Shel Silverstein. And you can already tell it's poetry from the title, because what did I tell you, that poetry doesn't really follow the same grammar rules as prose, which, remember, prose is the normal kind of writing in your novels and in your textbooks. Well, we know mustn'ts isn't really used that often in grammar, so we already know that he's kind of twisting the rules a little bit. So this poem is called Listen to the Mustn'ts, and remember, your exit slip, you're listening for the tone. Listen to the mustn'ts, child, listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never-haves and listen close to me. Anything can happen, child, anything can be. I like this poem a lot. I think it's a good poem to have right now. And to me, it kind of provides hope. So you're going to think about what's the mood and the feeling. I would probably use an adjective to answer your question. What is the tone of this poem? I'll read it one more time. Listen to the mustn'ts, child, listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never-haves and listen close to me. Anything can happen, child, anything can be. Okay, so when we meet for office hours on Monday from 10 to 10:45, bring your exit slip and we can discuss what you guys thought of that poem. And I'm going to have some questions for you about what you remember about tone and then poetry versus prose. Sound good? Okay, guys, I'm going to go and eat some lunch, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this lesson. All right, miss you so much. You can write to me, you can send me an email through your parents if you had any questions about this video. All right, bye guys, love you all.